sir. News from the underground.
Brutality on the street. Casualty is
Hello and welcome to The Underground, the podcast where we talk about the world and how crazy and weird and messed up it is. Today on the podcast, I would like to talk a little bit about lockdowns. And I kind of want to just go through like why I don't think that this last lockdown that Ontario is in is necessary or wise. And ultimately, I think that at this point, lockdowns are doing more harm than they are doing good. So that's what I want to talk about today. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to say is the problem with COVID in general breaks down to a very simple problem, I think. And that problem is this idea between freedom and safety, and how much freedom, like really the question becomes, how much freedom are we willing to give up to ensure our safety? And so we have to look at both how important freedom is and how much we, prioritize our freedom. And we also have to look at like how safe are the decisions keeping us, right? And so when we talk about lockdowns in particular, lockdowns are a major infringement on freedom. And before we get into it, before anybody gets upset already at me for saying that, which doesn't seem that controversial, but people get upset about everything. I would just say, like, we have to all admit that lockdowns are a major infringement on our freedom. Your freedom as a business owner, if you're a small business, your freedom to move is protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right? Your freedom to travel, your freedom of peaceful assembly, which is also a charter right. And I want to do another podcast on charter rights and how important freedom is. But so we just have to admit first that freedom is important to us as human beings, really. Like, we believe that these, freedoms are inherent, that we get these no matter what. They're a right. They're not a privilege. Okay. So like I said, I'll do another podcast on that, but the other question is safety. Okay. So how safe do we need to be is one question. And the other question is, are the things that we're doing keeping us safe? And I think at this point, lockdowns maybe they are keeping us safe. This is a tough argument to make, because maybe lockdowns are keeping us somewhat safe. It's hard to tell, because there's no way to do a perfect experiment that shows lockdowns keeping us safe or lockdowns during a certain period of COVID in a certain place at a certain time versus no lockdown in that same place and same time. We can look at states like Texas, who have lifted all lockdown restrictions, all mask mandates, and even lifted social distancing, and haven't seen their numbers go up yet. Now, obviously, they're in a different time span of this disease, because we all know that this, the cases get worse, they get better, right? So it's not really fair to compare us in Ontario to Texas. Okay, I get that. So what do we do, though? We have to look at the data that we do have available. Okay, so I posted this on my Facebook. I don't know if you follow me on Facebook, but analyzing the data that we have for this what we're calling the third wave, which started at the beginning of March. So since March 7th up until April 10th, we've had 64,263 cases, right? That's I got the statistics from Ontario Public Health. And there have been 60 deaths since March 7th up until April 10th. Now, obviously, this isn't perfect, because some people who caught it during this will, die from it later. But when I was looking at the data, I noticed that deaths and cases seem to rise at the same time together. there's not a huge delay in deaths. That's what I noticed from the data. So I think I can defensively say that. So when we do 60 deaths divided by 64,263 cases, and then times it by 100 to get a percent, we see 0.09% people are dying from this third wave. Now, to me, that means 99.91% of people who get COVID during this third wave in Ontario will survive. Okay. And obviously that's not all there is to this, but I think that's a really important statistic to say. When the survival rate is 99.91, I don't think a lockdown is necessary. And I know I don't know, is that controversial to say? I don't think it's that controversial. I think to me, that makes a lot of sense. That, the survival rate right now is high enough. Maybe it wasn't during the other lockdowns. You can make that argument. But right now, I think that the survival rate is high enough that we don't need a lockdown. And we especially don't need a stricter lockdown, which is what Doug Ford is going for with this third wave, right? Closing off the Dollarama so that you can't buy socks. I saw posts about that. Who buys their socks at Dollarama? Anyway, I have high quality socks only. Anyway, that's really not related to COVID. My point being that I think when the death rate is that low, that we should be opening things up, not closing things down, even though the cases are going up. It seems like more recently, less people are dying from the disease than before. There's a lot of talk about variants. I'm not going to talk about variants at all in this podcast. But it seems that the cases are going up and deaths going down means the disease is either we're getting like this herd immunity that people keep talking about, or that the disease is changing so that it's not as deadly. That's the conclusion that I come to with this. Okay. So if you get COVID, you have a 99.91% chance of surviving. There's a lot of factors that go into that, because I'm sure, again, if you're healthy, it's lower than that. And if you're unhealthy, it's higher. If you're older, it's higher. If you're younger, it's lower, right? Or the other way around. Anyway, the point is that there's a lot of factors I'm not taking into consideration, but overall. Okay, so lockdowns. We all know the effects of lockdowns. We've been living with lockdowns on and off for a whole year now, and we're tired of them. Even if you're rah-rah, support the government's decisions no matter what they do, you know that these lockdowns are hard on people. They've been hard on all of us, both mentally. Like our mental health is bad. Our suicide rates, I don't have numbers for suicide rates, but what I've heard is that suicides are going up all over the world during this lockdown. Not during this lockdown, but during this COVID lockdowns and stuff like that. It's obviously hard on our mental health. We're all suffering, because of this. We're all going crazy in our own homes. We know that the lockdowns are unhealthy for us mentally. The other thing is the other thing, and I think maybe even more importantly, I don't know if it's more important than people's mental health, and it's certainly not more important than suicides, but small businesses are closing and people aren't able to make a living. I used to really hate arguments about economics, money arguments that people are losing money. Obviously, safety is more important than money, but when the government's not doing anything to support people, which I know they have CERB and stuff, but I would argue that they're not doing a lot. And, for example, my wife and I have to pay our OSAP back during both the last lockdowns. The first lockdown, they canceled the payments, not canceled. They delayed the payments for our OSAP, our student debt. But the next two, they didn't. And we're paying $750 a month, which was, more than our rent that we were at our last place. But, Yeah, we're paying $750 a month in OSAP. The government, if they want to do something to help people, I want to say cancel the student debt, but also just like help us out with student debt and don't make us pay $750 when we're in the middle of a lockdown. Now, luckily, I can work during lockdown. My wife's business has been destroyed, but anyway, that's a different podcast. The point is, small businesses are being hurt. A lot of people are speaking out about this, and I think this is the rallying cry, because this is the thing that people can sympathize with the most: is small businesses being hurt, because you can't live if you don't have money. I mean, that's the way our economy works. That's the way that our system works, and I have a lot of problems with our system, but at the end of the day, people need to make a living, whether there's COVID or not. And taking that away from some people and not others, actually taking it away from anybody, I think is wrong. But it's especially wrong when some people are hurting more than others, not because of COVID, but because of government decisions. So we all know, small businesses. That's important. Okay. So, but the thing that I keep hearing is like, what about those 60 people, right? Those 60 people have died since March 7th to April 10th that I said, right? What about those 60 people? Those diseases or those cases are preventable, and, we have to do everything that we can to save those people from dying. I believe that every life is infinitely valuable, but I also believe that I shouldn't say but. There's not a but there. There's an and. Buts are stinky. Every life is valuable, and also people's livelihood, people's health, people's mental health, that's also really important. And 60 people dying sounds like it's a lot. But let's look at statistics again. Let's use data to come up with good decisions, like the government has not done, and look at the data to make decisions. Okay. All right. So, from 2017 to 2019, again, this was posted on my Facebook. I did a post about this, but, we had roughly 8,000 to 9,500 deaths in 1 month. So I'm looking at several months from 2017 to 2019, particularly March and April. And in 1 month, the range was, there was no less than 8,000 and there was no more than 9,500 deaths in 1 month. So if we divide it up by 31 days, which I don't know if there's 31 days or 30 days, but anyway, I never remember the rhyme. The point is that if we divide by 31, that brings us to 258 to 306 deaths per day in Ontario. This is numbers for Ontario. And again, I got these numbers from, I think these were from Stats Canada. So currently, right now, we're experiencing under 20 deaths per day of COVID. So a normal year, 2016 to 2019, normal year, we would see 8,000 to 9,500 deaths, 258 to 306 deaths a day. Right now, we're seeing 20 a day from COVID. And obviously, that doesn't take into account other deaths from other things, and those are still happening. But 20 to me is not a big enough number to justify a lockdown. Is it? Maybe I shouldn't say that. To me, that doesn't justify a lockdown. But I want to ask you, how many? This is the question I think doesn't get talked about: is how many deaths? What's the number of deaths where we should start taking measures? Okay, so how many deaths per day or whatever do we need to justify? Especially, let's talk specifically. This podcast is about lockdown. So how many do we need to justify lockdown? And I don't know the number. I don't have the number. I just don't think that 20 is enough. And when we get up to 50, we can start talking about it. When we get, up to 80 to 100, then maybe, that does justify a lockdown. The other thing I think we need to look at is and like I said earlier, this is hard to tell, but are lockdowns effective? Right now, I would say lockdowns are less effective than they've ever been because people are sick and tired of them. Businesses are staying open against the government's will, and so I think people aren't following it because they're tired and they're sick of it and they can't be locked down anymore, which I think is fair. Like, people are tired of it. We're all tired of it. And at some point, I think too, whether there's a disease out there or not, we have to get back to our lives and start living again. Being locked down in our house is not healthy for us mentally. And at some point, I just think that we need to start living our lives and yeah, like, just, I need to live my life. I need to do the things that make life worth living. I need to do the things that make me happy. Lockdowns are hurting us more, I think, now than the disease is. So we've gotten to a point, I think the whole time we've been playing this game where the disease is killing people, hospitalizing people. There's possible long-term effects. It's a nasty disease, right? Like, one thing I want to make clear in my position on this is that I'm not like COVID is a hoax person. Yeah, I don't. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. None of these like more extreme positions. I just think that we need to make reasonable, well thought out decisions and use data that we have to make those decisions. And I don't see the government, if they say they're looking at data, if they're looking at data, they're not looking at the same data I'm looking at, because lockdowns have not shown to be very effective. We saw a spike in cases in December. We had a lockdown on December 26th. And maybe I can get a graphic. Can I do graphics? I don't know if I can do that. I don't know how to do that. But we can see on December 26th there was a lockdown. The lockdown was implemented, and the cases continued to rise. And it didn't. I mean, there's no indication that it slowed anything down. Like, they were skyrocketing. Cases were skyrocketing, and they did not come down until well into January, I believe. But maybe there's a graphic that you can see that I can't see right now. But anyway, it doesn't seem to help. And I think that's the biggest thing. If it's not effective, then don't do it, right? If seatbelts don't work, then we shouldn't make seatbelts mandatory. So, the reason that seatbelts are mandatory is because we know that they're very effective, and we can see data and numbers that show that. And that's why we have laws, to wear a seatbelt. We're not doing that with COVID. And it's not that we don't have the data. There's data there. There's data available. There's data from other countries like Texas. I know Texas isn't a country, but there's data from Texas and Florida that show that there's been no spikes when they lifted lockdown. And I know there can be 100 reasons for that, but we have to go on the data that we actually have and not speculative data that doesn't exist, speculating on what could happen. If we react to what could happen, I think that's what the government is doing, and I think that that's what has made this so frustrating for the average person like you and me. We're speculating on what could happen. We're talking about worst case scenarios, and we're making plans based on that. And I think that's not just like a bad idea, but I think it's actually very dangerous, right? Because now we have people who don't trust the government. A lot of people that don't trust the government, don't believe what they're saying. This is where conspiracy theories and things come from, is not being able to trust the people who are in charge. And they say they're using data. I don't know what data they're looking at. I wish they would be more clear about the data that they're looking at, so we could see, like, prove it to me. Prove to me that the lockdown's going to work. I keep hitting this thing. I have a new setup, and it's kind of, I haven't worked out all the kinks yet, but I obviously am hitting this way too much. Prove to me that lockdowns are effective. Prove to me that masks are effective. This podcast is not about masks, but just show proof that these things work. And a lot of the evidence that I've seen is not sufficient as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of the evidence is not good evidence that these things work. So, yeah. So if you want to do, especially an extreme thing, like masks are one thing, right? Masks are not a big deal. Wear the mask. It's inconvenient. It's annoying. I hate it. There are some adverse health effects to wearing a mask. But overall, like if it's effective and if it's even somewhat effective, like it's fine. We can deal with masks. Like they're forcing teachers to wear face shields. I don't see any evidence or data. The face shield thing is ridiculous to me. This idea that COVID can come into your eyes. I feel like we're watching that movie with Mark Wahlberg, The Happening, where they're like running away from the wind. The whole movie is terrible. But that's what I feel like we're doing when we're doing things like that. We're just afraid of air, really, is what it comes down to. Anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. The fact is, the point I'm trying to make is is just we need data that is accurate and shows, we need data that's accurate and shows that this lockdown is going to do something, that we're sacrificing for a reason, that we're giving up something that has purpose to it. Because if it doesn't, and we're locking down for nothing, which I would argue that we are, we're sacrificing way too much for way too little. I guess we're sacrificing, and this goes back to the freedom versus safety. We're sacrificing way too much freedom for very little safety. I think that's all I have to say. I'm going to try and continue these podcasts, probably about once a month, I think now, and continue. I've had some major life changes and had to not do this, but I think this is good for my mental health. Talking about this, working through these things in my head logically and sharing them with people that are going to challenge me and push back and make me question myself, which I think is a very healthy thing to do. Anyway. So I hope to be back at least once a month, maybe even more if I can do it. But thank you for listening to The Underground, the podcast where we talk about the world and how crazy and weird and messed up it is. My name's Duncan Michael McPherson, and it was a pleasure talking to you about COVID. Hopefully you found this podcast reasonable and balanced and not too extreme or anything. So thank you for listening, and God bless. Share on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever your social media is. Share this podcast and tell your friends. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
From the dark.